Throughout the entire history of the NHL, there have been moments that have defined the sport, dynasties that have changed generations, legendary performances that became immortal, and championship-winning goals that are forever etched in hockey history. But not every defining moment came from a celebration. Some came from a single collision. Hits so devastating that they didn't just change a game, a playoff series, or even a career. They changed the NHL itself. And over the span of 3 decades, 3 Hall of Fame players found themselves at the center of moments that have forever altered the conversation around one problem, and that is concussions. Each hit has told a different story, but together, all of these moments have altered the NHL as we know it today. Now, before we continue, today's video is sponsored by our good friends over at SeatGeek. Now, it is the NHL offseason, but there are plenty of live events still going on, and SeatGeek has tickets for pretty much everything. Sports, concerts, comedy shows, live events, and more. The MLB season is in full swing, and believe it or not, the NHL season is closer than you think. You can already find NHL tickets on the SeatGeek app, so it's a great time to start planning ahead and get tickets there. And one of my favorite things about SeatGeek is how easy it is to find a great deal. When you're looking for tickets, SeatGeek gives every listing a rating from 1 to 10 based on the value of the seats. Just look for the green. That's a great deal. Snatch up those tickets, pick your seats, and you're good to go. SeatGeek, of course, has hooked us up with an awesome deal. Right now, you can get 10% off your next pair of tickets when you download the SeatGeek app and use promo code Hockey 2026. Just click the link in the description, download the app, and the code will automatically be added to your account. Get started, use the code, and enjoy your next game on a great deal using SeatGeek. For athletes, there's a 10-letter word that is dreaded by absolutely everyone. That word is concussion. The most basic definition of the word is a temporary loss of consciousness caused by a blow to the head. It's the effects of such a blow to the head that causes confusion and temporary loss of physical and mental abilities. In today's NHL, we still see this quite often. It's the nature of a physical sport, and as long as it stays physical, it'll likely never go away. Nowadays, if a player gets his bell rung, the league and central spotters will pull that player out of the game out of precaution to make sure that no further damage will take place. But back in the year 2000, in an Eastern Conference final matchup between the New Jersey Devils and the Philadelphia Flyers, there was no such thing as concussion protocol. But in order to understand the magnitude of this moment, we need a little context. You see, every once in a while, there's a player that comes along who has the potential to completely change the way an entire sport is played. These are the players that we call generational talents. Players like Wayne Gretzky, Mario Lemieux, and, well, this man, Eric Lindros. From the moment Lindros entered the spotlight, he was labeled as the next great one. At 6'4" and 240 pounds, Lindros was almost impossible to contain. However, even before he stepped onto the ice for his first game, there were already moments that made him one of the most polarizing players in hockey. Lindros was selected first overall by the Quebec Nordiques, but instead of immediately joining the team like almost every first overall pick before him, Lindros refused to sign. Eventually, the Nordiques traded him to the Philadelphia Flyers, and just like that, the Lindros era in Philly was born. From the moment he arrived in Philadelphia, Lindros made an immediate impact and became exactly what Flyers fans wanted. He was a complete superstar who could score, hit, fight, and play with the type of emotion and intensity that made him impossible not to love. But when your game is built around that kind of physicality, it comes with a cost. The first 7 years of Lindros' career in Philadelphia were filled with incredible production, but they were also filled with constant injuries. He won the Hart Trophy, led the Flyers to the Stanley Cup Final, and looked like a player who was just entering his prime. Unfortunately for Lindros and Philadelphia, they ran into the Detroit Red Wings and were swept in the '97 Cup Final. It was a crushing ending, but Lindros was still only in his mid-20s, and his best years appeared to be ahead of him. However, the way he played the game came with a dangerous reality. He lived by the sword and died by the sword. Because of his size and physical style, players started to return the favor. One of those players was the New Jersey Devils Hall of Fame defenseman, Scott Stevens. At 6'2" and 215 pounds, Stevens was one of the most devastating open ice hitters that the NHL had ever seen. He intimidated almost everyone he played against. Almost everyone, because Eric Lindros was one of the few players who never seemed to back down. Over the years, Lindros and Stevens had their bouts, and that bad blood would eventually carry over into this Eastern Conference final matchup. But this was a series that Eric Lindros should have never been a part of. Even though Lindros missed games every season due to injuries, the 99-2000 series brought a completely different problem. That was concussions. Eric Lindros was almost the perfect hockey player, but he had one major weakness. He had the habit of skating with his head down, and while his size made it difficult for opponents to catch him in a vulnerable position, eventually someone was going to get the opportunity. That opportunity came from Darius Kasparaitis, who delivered a hit that gave Lindros his first major concussion during the 98 season. At the time, the Flyers, like most professional organizations, understood very little about concussions as a whole. Instead of treating it as a serious brain injury, Lindros was initially sent to a migraine specialist, and things only got worse as the Flyers were also slow to diagnose Lindros with a collapsed lung in that 98 and 99 season. Then came the 99 and 2000 season, which was a complete nightmare for Lindros. In December of 99, Lindros took a hit from Jason Weimer and suffered another concussion. He missed just 2 games. By mid-January, a series of hits during a game against Atlanta resulted in concussion number 2. This time, Lindros only missed 4 games. Then in early March, Boston's defenseman Hal Gill rocked Lindros with yet another hit. He stayed in the game and continued playing for an entire week before the concussion was finally diagnosed by the team's medical staff. From there, he would miss the remainder of the regular season. Then in early May, while skating with the Flyers minor league affiliate on a conditioning assignment, Lindros apparently collided with a teammate during practice and reportedly suffered yet another concussion. Somehow, after 4 concussions in one season though, Lindros returned in late May for an Eastern Conference final against the New Jersey Devils. In Philadelphia, the situation became even more complicated. There were public disagreements between the Flyers GM, Bobby Clarke, and Lindros' parents over how the team was handling his health. Former teammate John LeClaire even said that when Lindros suffered these concussions, the team's medical approach was essentially just give him a couple days and he'll be fine. To make matters worse, after the collapsed lung incident and the ongoing concussion issues, the Flyers stripped Lindros of his captaincy late in the season. The fact that he was even playing in this game was a failure for Lindros, the Flyers, the NHL, and player safety as a whole. But just 7 minutes into this Game 7, Lindros made the one mistake no hockey player should ever make.
Here's 88. Lindros makes the move, and Lindros is hammered down on the ice by Scott Stevens. And Lindros remains down on the ice as all the other players come together.
Oh boy. Oh boy. This is the worst case scenario here for Eric Lindros.
As Lindros carried the puck into the Devil zone, he made the cardinal sin of cutting towards the middle of the ice with his head down. That went directly into the path of Scott Stevens. By today's NHL standards, this would have been considered one of the most dangerous types of hits you can deliver. The principal point of contact was Stevens' shoulder connecting with Lindros' head, and today, that play would likely result in a major penalty, a game misconduct, and supplemental discipline. But none of that was the case after this hit, and that moment changed everything. It marked the end of Lindros' career with the Philadelphia Flyers and the beginning of the end of his time as an NHL superstar. The Flyers would lose Game 7 by a score of 2-1, but they also lost one of the most dominant players hockey had ever seen. Lindros missed the entire following season with post-concussion syndrome while demanding a trade, which eventually sent him to the New York Rangers. After that, he played only 5 more seasons, but he was never the same player. The physical element that separated him from everyone else had disappeared. Rangers captain Mark Messier even acknowledged that the concussion problems had reached a point where Lindros would deliver a hit and immediately feel the effects himself. Suffering that many concussions in such a short period of time would derail almost anyone's career. But this hit became the final turning point that permanently changed Eric Lindros. He retired after the 2007 season, and during his 13-year career, he missed an equivalent of over 3 seasons because of injuries, and most of them were concussion-related. If Lindros had stayed healthy, he could have been remembered as one of the greatest players in league history. During his time with the Flyers, he averaged 1.3 points per game, which at that time was ranked 4th in NHL history behind only Wayne Gretzky, Mario Lemieux, and Bobby Orr. He was on trajectory to become one of the game's greatest players to ever play. However, Lindros wouldn't be the last victim of a Scott Stevens hit. Just 3 years later, another superstar would find himself at the center of one of the most unforgettable moments in Stanley Cup history. A moment that became just as significant for what happened after as the hit itself. See, in the early 2000s, it was rare to find undersized players who could dominate the league. Paul Kariya was one of the few undersized guys in the mid-90s and early 2000s who could do exactly that. Despite his smaller stature at 5'10", Kariya's speed, agility, and incredible vision set him apart. He was a modern-day superstar stuck in the grinding clutch and grab era of NHL hockey. In '93, Paul Kariya was selected by the Mighty Ducks of Anaheim as the 4th overall pick in the NHL entry draft and instantly became the face of the franchise. Even though the Ducks went through some tough years as an expansion franchise, Paul Kariya was always a standout. However, Kariya dealt with some concussion issues himself earlier in his career. In '98, Kariya suffered a severe concussion after a cross-check to the head from Chicago Blackhawks defenseman Gary Suter. That hit forced him to miss the final 28 games of the NHL season and prevented him from representing Canada at the '98 Nagano Winter Olympics. However, Kariya still established himself as one of the game's best. He was a 7-time NHL All-Star, a 2-time Lady Byng Trophy winner, and a member of the prestigious 50-goal club. But by the time the 2003 season rolled around, team success was rare. The Ducks had only been to the playoffs twice, and they didn't have much luck. But this 2003 playoff run changed all of that. At the start of the playoffs, no one would have guessed that Kariya and the Ducks would have made it all the way to the Stanley Cup final. They were the 7th seed entering the playoffs, and they were also slated to face the Detroit Red Wings in the first round. Going up against the defending Stanley Cup champs, the Ducks pulled off the upset despite being heavy underdogs. The story remained the same in their path to the final in both the following series against Dallas and Minnesota. That would lead them to a Stanley Cup final against, shocker, the New Jersey Devils. With this series heading into a Game 6 in the Devils' favor, the Ducks needed more of that underdog magic if they wanted to force a Game 7 and win the Stanley Cup. So 5 minutes into the first period, they came out hot, scoring 3 straight goals to take a big lead. Kariya was instrumental in that lead as he had 2 assists, and that was huge considering the Devils had done a great job of shutting him down so far in this series. The name of the game in this series for New Jersey was to shut down Paul Kariya by any means necessary. This was the Devils' MO in the late 90s and early 2000s as they built their championship teams on stifling defense that incorporated the trap. And so they made sure that whenever Kariya touched the puck, he felt the heat. And even when he didn't have the puck, the Devils made it clear they wanted him to feel uncomfortable. So far in this game, they had given Kariya very little space with the puck, and he still made them pay. The Ducks captain was playing his best hockey of the series. Then this happened.
Got near side support, tried to draw it around, and down on the ice.
Oh my goodness!
Is that Paul Kariya?
Yes, it is.
Paul Kariya leveled
my, and
by
he's had concussion problems in the past. This is the first open ice big hit that Scott Stevens has thrown in the series.
With 13 minutes left in the second period, Paul Kariya chipped the puck on his backhand to his left wing, and looking at his pass, Scott Stevens delivered a blindsided open ice hit to Paul Kariya. This hit, like the Lindros one, would never be allowed in today's NHL. Not only was it a blatant hit to the head, but it also showed clear intent to injure with major interference. However, at the time, it was considered clean, and this hit didn't even result in a penalty. And as Kariya laid flat unconscious on the ice, he finally woke up with his breath completely fogging up his visor. After spending some time down on the ice with the Ducks medical staff, Kariya somehow got back up to his feet. But after standing up, his legs began to wobble and it looked like he would be out for the rest of the series. Or at least, he should have been.
And Paul Kariya to see whether or not he's going to stay out. He went out and took a couple of skates, and now he comes out to play.
Well, we're being told it was the wind that was knocked out of him. Well, I'll tell you what.
It was the wind, all
I'll
right.
tell you what. He's showing me something. I didn't think we'd see him until next season. Look at this. He's
I
back.
agree.
Unbelievable.
He sure had a sudden gush of air come out of his lungs when we had that close-up of him.
He was unconscious on the ice.
After being knocked unconscious only 5 minutes prior, somehow Paul Kariya was back in the game. No one could believe it, including Scott Stevens. When he hit someone, they stayed down. Had this happened today, he wouldn't have even had the chance to get back on the ice. If a player showed the signs that Korea had, they would be completely done for the game and likely much longer after that. But unfortunately, 20 years ago, the league didn't have concussion spotters like they do today. So if Korea said he felt fine and was good to go, he was going. After all, what training staff is going to tell the captain in a do-or-die game that he can't go back out there? Korea was the heart and soul of this team, and despite being an undersized, skillful player, he was determined to lead this group no matter what. And so what would happen next would go down in history as one of the greatest comebacks of all time. That moment became unforgettable for hockey fans everywhere, and it wasn't even remembered by the man who made it happen. Years later, it was revealed that Paul Kariya had no recollection of the game after the Scott Stevens hit. In fact, he couldn't remember the next 3 days. Despite that great moment with the Ducks forcing a Game 7, the Devils ultimately took the series to win the Stanley Cup, and Kariya was left riddled with a career of concussion injuries. He would miss significant time the next season due to lingering effects of this hit, and when it came time to retire in 2010, it was heavily influenced by his history of concussions and concerns about his long-term health. Even in his retirement, he maintained that he felt the league never did enough to deter players from making those types of hits. And years after these two incidents, these types of hits continued to happen. But by the beginning of the next decade in 2010, awareness surrounding head injuries had grown significantly, yet the NHL was still continuing to refine how those injuries were identified and managed. Then, the biggest player in the sport became the next chapter in that story. This is a prime Sidney Crosby, and on January 1st of 2011, the Pittsburgh Penguins found themselves squaring off against the Washington Capitals for the NHL's annual Winter Classic. At only 23 years old, Sidney Crosby was on top of the hockey world. After winning his first Stanley Cup in 2009, Crosby won gold at the 2010 Winter Olympics by scoring one of the most iconic goals in hockey history. By every measure, he was the face of the league, and his play spoke for itself. To start the 2010-2011 season, Crosby kicked it off with a 25-game point streak and eventually led the NHL with 32 goals and 66 points in his first 41 games. Crosby was on pace for a ridiculous 64 goals and 132-point finish on the season. During that era where scoring was down, those numbers were unheard of. He was playing a level of hockey that was simply unstoppable. And with the entire hockey world watching this game between a prime Ovi and prime Crosby, this happened.
Good for Crosby. PJ and I were saying this could be a concussion.
Well, as he's going by, he thought I'd give him a little shot. And you can't blame the guy. I'm going by, I'll just, as I'm going by, funny he hit his head, eh? And I'm going to tell you, if he doesn't have a good concussion, I don't know what is there.
In the dying seconds of the second period, Capitals centerman David Steckel would collide squarely with Crosby's head. An accidentally on purpose play that gave the face of the league his first major blow to the noggin. Crosby got up gingerly on his own, but he was noticeably shaken up. And even though the league had seen what had happened with its other superstars in the past all those years ago, there still wasn't a standard protocol in place. You see, after the hit by Steckel, Crosby didn't even leave the game for good. He actually returned for the third period and played nearly 25 minutes over the course of the entire game. Even Crosby spoke out about this later in his career.
Back to when I got my first one, there wasn't a protocol. There wasn't a lot of information out there as far as how to handle them.
So with nothing properly in place, Crosby didn't sit out the next game either and took a hard hit from Victor Hedman in the process. After that, Crosby was officially ruled out with a concussion. At first, it was deemed only a mild concussion, but as Crosby famously said, he didn't really think that there was such a thing as a mild concussion. As the weeks turned into months with Crosby on the injured reserve, speculation began as to how serious the head injury truly was. There were reports that Crosby felt like himself for some days by dominating practice, and then out of nowhere, he'd be taking a shower and get struck with a headache. Every time it seemed like there was progress made, there was seemingly another setback, and Crosby was right back to square one. As he spent more time on the shelf, everyone started to speculate whether or not the face of the NHL would actually decide to retire for his long-term health. His dad had to shut that down pretty quickly, but after being ruled out of the first round of the playoffs, Crosby admitted afterwards that he had suffered yet another setback. And as the offseason rolled around, the expectation was that Crosby would take the time required necessary to recover and then be ready to return for the 11 and 12 season. Except all throughout the summer, he was still showing symptoms of a concussion. So when training camp arrived and the season began, Crosby remained on the injured reserve. Hockey fans were getting robbed of seeing a prime Sidney Crosby, but at least it was for a good reason and out of extreme precaution to not have another repeat of Lindros or Correa. To jeopardize Crosby's career at 23 would have been a terrible thing for NHL hockey. Now, at this point, even if Crosby was deemed fit to return, there were still the question marks about what type of player would actually be coming back. As we've seen, some guys get a concussion and they never truly return back to their previous form. So if Crosby was healthy enough to come back, would he be the same Crosby that was torching the league before? At his best, Sidney Crosby is below the hash marks and initiating contact. However, if he couldn't take the inevitable bumps that came from playing that type of style, it meant that we would likely never see Crosby at his best again. For all fans, everything seems so odd about the process. There was clips circulating online of him at practice, and he looked absolutely incredible. This made it all the more confusing as to why he still wasn't cleared to play. Crosby would miss all of October until finally the hockey world received some good news.
This was the scene this morning. Sidney Crosby stepping onto the ice at the Consol Energy Center in Pittsburgh for the Pens morning skate as they get set to take on the New York Islanders in about an hour's time.
After constant frustration, Crosby would get the green light to finally return after 10 months without playing a single NHL game. And on November 21st against the New York Islanders, this game would be televised nationally. It meant everything to the league, the fans, and again, most of all, to Crosby himself. For the entire hockey world, this had been an excruciating journey that all started from mishandling the first concussion. This return had the entire hockey world holding its breath. We've seen comebacks from concussions go south quickly, so it wasn't enough for Crosby to just return. He needed to return and make a statement that he can still be the best hockey player in the world. And so just 5 minutes into this game, he did exactly that.
Eric England off the defense, moves the puck to center. Here's Crosby with a burst of speed up the middle, gets open, scores! Welcome back, Sid! Didn't you just know he'd do something like that?
After this moment, Sidney Crosby remained healthy for majority of his career. He would go on to win another 2 Stanley Cups, a second gold medal, and despite picking up another mild concussion in 2017, Crosby was still able to live up to his full potential. And that's because shortly after Crosby was injured in January of 2011, the NHL took a massive step towards modernizing concussion management and implemented Rule 48, which banned headshots. Players who were suspected of suffering a concussion were required to leave the bench and undergo evaluation by a physician in what's known as the quiet room. But this was only the beginning. As the sports world gained a deeper understanding of concussions and the devastating long-term effects of conditions like CTE, the pressure on the NHL continued to grow. And so throughout the next decade, mounting medical evidence, public scrutiny, and legal challenges pushed the league to keep strengthening its concussion policies. In 2016, the protocol was expanded to include spotters in the arena watching the games on television. From there, they can demand a player who showed concussion symptoms to be pulled from the game for evaluation. If a concussion is diagnosed, the player cannot return to the game or practice that same day. It is very far from a perfect process, but compared to the days of Eric Lindros and Paul Correa, it is a big improvement. And so looking back at these 3 moments in today's NHL, none of this would have ever happened. Eric Lindros would have never been cleared to play in that Game 6, and his legacy wouldn't be shrouded by one of the biggest what-ifs in league history. Paul Correa was almost the same, and because of it, he doesn't even remember one of the greatest moments of his own career. Sidney Crosby was dangerously close to this fate as well, but a year on the sideline during the prime of his career definitely played some role in prompting the NHL to finally revamp the entire process. 3 hits, 3 Hall of Fame players, and 3 moments all separated by more than a decade, made hockey history and changed the future of the sport forever.